The first thing Ben Sterling saw, piercing the dusty gloom of his barn, was the impossible splash of raven hair against pale straw, and then the crimson stain blossoming on worn buckskin. His heart, a creature long accustomed to the steady, lonely rhythm of his isolated ranch, slammed against his ribs with the force of a mule kick. For a stunned moment, he could only stare. A woman, a Comanche woman, wounded, perhaps dying, lay there as if dropped from the sky, an emissary from a world of violence and pain he had long sought to escape. He hadn't uttered a word to another soul in weeks, yet the sight of her, so vulnerable, so utterly out of place, spoke to a part of him he thought long dead. This wasn't just an intrusion, this was a cataclysm, and his kindness, a reflex he couldn't suppress, was about to ignite the most perilous and profound chapter of his solitary life, the spark of an impossible love in a land that bred hardship far more often than hope. Ben Sterling was a man etched by solitude and the harsh poetry of the high plains. His days were a testament to routine, mending fences that sagged under the relentless sun, tending the few head of cattle that were his livelihood, the silence broken only by the lowing of his stock or the mournful sigh of the wind through the eaves of his small, sturdy cabin. Years ago, the laughter of his wife, Martha, and the bright chatter of his son, Tim, had filled these spaces. Now only echoes remained, ghosts conjured by the flicker of the hearth fire on long, empty nights. The fever had taken them, leaving behind an ache so profound it had driven Ben to this remote valley, seeking a quiet buffer against a world that had dealt him its cruelest blow. He was competent, his hands calloused but sure, whether coaxing a stubborn calf or sighting down the barrel of his Winchester at a thieving coyote. His movements were economical, his words few. He'd almost forgotten the sound of his own voice, save for gruff commands to his horse, Buck, or muttered curses at the unforgiving land. Yet, beneath the weathered exterior and the wall of deliberate isolation, a deep well of loneliness resided, a quiet yearning he rarely acknowledged. He knew the land, its moods, its dangers. His eyes, often distant, missed little. The nervous flick of a rabbit's ear, the distant spiral of a hawk, subtle signs that spoke a language older than words. This ingrained awareness, a residue from a life before the ranch, a life he tried to bury, was stirring now. A cold premonition that the fragile peace he'd so painstakingly constructed was about to be shattered. The land itself, beautiful in its desolation, was a mirror to his own guarded heart, vast, a little broken, but still capable of unexpected life. He moved towards the hayloft, each step careful, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon light. The woman, Narrow, he would later learn to call her, lay utterly still. He knelt, the scent of hay, dust, and the metallic tang of blood filling his nostrils. Her face, even pale and etched with pain, held a fierce, wild beauty that caught at his breath. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. A crudely tied bandage on her arm was soaked through, and a darker stain spread ominously across her side. A gunshot, no doubt. He reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing her forehead. She was burning with fever. Her eyelids fluttered open, dark eyes, unfocused at first, then sharpening with a primal terror that made him recoil slightly. They were the eyes of a cornered doe, expecting only the hunter's killing blow. In that moment, all thought of the risk, of the trouble she would undoubtedly bring, vanished. He saw only her desperate fight for life, and a profound, inexplicable urge to shield that flicker from the encroaching darkness. This went beyond mere duty. It was a pull, visceral and immediate. He couldn't leave her here to die. He just couldn't. With a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who knew his reputation for gruff solitude, Ben lifted Naru into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a fragile weight against his chest. The short walk to the cabin felt momentous, as if he were carrying not just a wounded woman, but the future itself. He laid her on his own narrow cot, the rough blankets suddenly seeming inadequate. The cabin, his Spartan sanctuary, felt instantly transformed by her presence, charged with an urgent, feminine energy it hadn't known in years. Her skin was like fire. He worked with a methodical focus that masked the storm of emotions inside him. Water boiled over the hearth, the sharp scent of carbolic soap as he cleaned the angry, festering wound in her side, the careful way he tore strips from his own worn but clean shirt for bandages. Each touch was hesitant, yet firm. He saw the marks of a brutal struggle on her arms, old bruises mixing with new. This woman had fought hard. She drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring in her own tongue, words of pain, of fear, sometimes lashing out weakly. He'd soothe her with low, meaningless sounds, much as he would a spooked colt. He forced sips of water between her cracked lips, later thin broth. For days, this became his world, her labored breathing, the heat of her fever, the constant vigilance. He found himself watching the rise and fall of her chest, a strange tightness in his own. He'd almost forgotten what it felt to care this intensely for another living soul. His Winchester, usually a tool, became a companion, always within reach. The solitude he'd once cherished now felt like a vulnerability. She was hunted, and by helping her, he had painted a target on his own back, a forgotten part of him, the part that knew how to watch, how to listen, how to anticipate danger, began to awaken, shaking off the dust of disuse. The fever broke like a prairie storm, sudden and fierce, leaving Nero weak but lucid. Her dark eyes, no longer clouded by delirium, followed Ben's every move with an unnerving intensity. They were wary, assessing, but the raw terror had receded. He continued his care, offering her small portions of rabbit stew, fresh water from the creek. He spoke little, unsure what to say, what she might understand. He'd simply point to himself. Ben. He'd repeat it. Then a gesture to her. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, her voice, raspy from disuse, whispered a single word. Neru. A name. It felt like a gift, a fragile bridge across a vast chasm of culture and experience. He nodded slowly, repeating it. Neru. A small smile, fleeting as a hummingbird's wing, touched her lips. He found himself noticing things. The way her dark hair, now cleaner, caught the light. The proud, unbent line of her profile, even in sickness. The fierce intelligence that shone in her eyes. He started leaving small things by her cot. A perfect hawk feather he found, a curiously shaped river stone, a handful of late-season berries. He expected nothing, but one day he saw her holding the feather, turning it over and over in her slender fingers, a thoughtful, distant look on her face. He felt an unexpected warmth spread through him, but the fragile piece was an illusion. He found tracks, shod horses, riders who knew how to move without leaving much sign, on the ridge overlooking his valley. They hadn't approached the cabin, but their presence was a cold promise. They were looking. His vigilance increased. He oiled his rifle, checked his ammunition. He found himself scanning the horizon constantly, his senses on a knife's edge. Neru, too, seemed to feel the shift. She'd watch him, her gaze holding a silent question, a shared understanding of the encroaching threat. The quiet ranch had become a silent battlefield, and they, its unlikely defenders. He found himself thinking less of Martha and Tim with that sharp, immediate pain. Neru's desperate present was a more demanding focus, and it stirred something in him that was not quite grief, but a fierce, protective fire. The knock on the door, when it came, was sharp, imperative, cutting through the midday stillness like a gunshot. Neru, who had been sitting by the hearth, stitching a tear in her dress with surprising skill, went rigid. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, the needle falling from her fingers. Ben saw the terror flare in them, raw and immediate. He put a finger to his lips, then gestured urgently towards the curtained alcove where she slept. She vanished behind it like a wraith. He took a slow breath, picked up his rifle, its familiar weight a grim comfort, and opened the door a crack. Sunlight glinted off 5 mounted men, their horses restless. The leader, a tall man with cold, pale eyes, and a neatly trimmed beard that failed to soften his predatory features, was Captain Malachi Brand. He wore a cavalry coat, but there was no soldierly honor in his gaze, only a chilling acquisitiveness. Brand's voice was smooth, like a river stone polished by 1,000 lies. "Afternoon. We're searching for a Comanche, a dangerous fugitive. Caused a great deal of trouble." Ben leaned against the door jamb, his face unreadable. "Haven't seen any Comanche. Just me. Been quiet here." Brand's smile was a wolf's grin. "This one is wounded. Couldn't have gotten far." His eyes flicked past Ben, trying to pierce the cabin's gloom, lingering on the barn. Behind him, a burly man with a vicious scar cleaving his cheek, Cutter, Brand's brutal enforcer, spat a stream of tobacco juice contemptuously close to Ben's boots. "She's slippery, that one. But we always get what we're after." Ben's hand tightened on his rifle. "This is my land. And I said, I haven't seen her." Brand's voice dropped, taking on a silken menace. "A man alone out here, it's a hard life. Easy for things to go wrong, or for a man to simply disappear." He let the threat hang in the air. "We'll just have a look around your property. Won't take long." Ben's eyes were like chips of flint. "Look all you want, but you stay out of my cabin. And my barn." Brand gave a curt nod, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "As you wish, rancher. For now." They rode off, fanning out, their search cursory but insulting. Ben watched them go, a cold fury coiling in his gut. He knew this wasn't over. A few days later, his fears were confirmed. Acrid smoke drifted on the wind, leading him to his north pasture. A large swath of his precious winter grazing land was a blackened, smoking ruin. A message, a warning. They suspected, or they were simply showing their power. That night, Nero spoke, her English halting but her meaning clear. "They hunt me. They kill my family. For a secret." Her eyes, when she looked at him, were filled not just with grief, but with a desperate plea for something she dared not name. Ben felt his resolve harden into something akin to iron. He wouldn't let them take her. He wouldn't let them win. This was his line in the dust. The burned pasture was a daily, smoking reminder of Brand's ruthlessness. Ben worked tirelessly, clearing a wider firebreak, his body aching, but his mind sharp, focused. Nero, her strength returning in surprising measure, worked beside him. She hauled water, her movements growing more fluid, her gaze steady. There was a quiet dignity about her, an unbroken spirit that Ben found himself admiring more each day. They spoke little, but a new understanding flowed between them, born of shared purpose and looming danger. One evening, the scent of wood smoke and distant pines filling the air, Nero finally told him her story. She sat by the hearth, the firelight dancing in her dark eyes, painting shadows on her high cheekbones. "Brand," she began, her voice low but steady, "he is not a soldier. He is a ghoul who feeds on pain. He came to my people not for war, but for greed. My grandfather, he was a keeper of wisdom, the guardian of the path to the sunken canyon. A sacred place, a place of healing, of life for the Comanche. Brand believes it holds gold." She described the brutal attack, the torture of her grandfather, his refusal to betray their secret even as his life ebbed away. She had escaped, wounded, carrying not a map drawn on hide, but the intricate knowledge of the canyon burned into her memory, and a small, sacred medicine bundle, all that was left of her heritage. As he listened, Ben felt a cold rage, familiar and unwelcome, rise within him. He'd seen this before, this same insatiable greed, this casual cruelty, in his days as an army scout. He'd witnessed a similar atrocity, a village wiped out for resisting encroachment, and the memory, the shame of his own helplessness then, had been a bitter poison in his soul for years. It was why he'd sought this isolation, to escape the savagery of men. And now it had found him. It had found Nero. He looked at her, at the courage that blazed in her eyes, the resilience that straightened her spine despite her ordeal. This was more than just protecting a fugitive now. This was a reckoning. The quiet rancher, the man who had tried to erase his past, felt the hardened scout within him stir, shake off the rust, and stand tall. The skills, the instincts, the cold fire needed for survival, they were all there waiting. "He won't find it," Nehru Ben said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "And he won't take you." His hand, almost of its own accord, reached out and briefly covered hers, where it rested on the rough-hewn table. A spark, unexpected and potent, seemed to pass between them. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, then something softer, deeper. The touch was brief, but it changed the air in the small cabin, charging it with a new, unspoken intimacy. The lonely ranch was about to become a fortress, not just of logs and stone, but of two spirits bound by fate and a courage they hadn't known they possessed. They knew Brand's return was not a matter of if, but when. His pride wouldn't allow him to be thwarted. His greed would claw at him until he possessed what he sought. Ben and Nehru moved with a grim, shared purpose, transforming the ranch into a calculated death trap. Ben's knowledge of every rock, every gully, every patch of treacherous ground became their blueprint. Nehru, her movements now swift and sure, possessed an intuitive grasp of camouflage and deception that complemented Ben's tactical thinking. She showed him how to use crushed leaves and shadows to become nearly invisible, how to read the wind for the faintest sound. He, in turn, taught her the deadly arc of his rifle, the best angles for enfilading fire. Woodpiles became breastworks, loose stones were arranged to create treacherous footing, the narrow creek bed a channel into an ambush. They worked from before dawn until after dusk, their hands often brushing, their eyes meeting in moments of shared intensity. He noticed the way a strand of her dark hair would escape its braid and curl against her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the grace in her movements, even when hauling heavy stones. She, in turn, saw the way his eyes, often so somber, would soften when he looked at her, the quiet strength in his hands, the unexpected gentleness in his rare smiles. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing hour. Then, as the first gray light of dawn bled into the sky, Nehru's hand fell on Ben's shoulder. He was instantly awake. "They come," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. Her eyes were fixed on a distant plume of dust, a deadly serpent uncoiling across the plains. Brand rode with a dozen men this time, Cutter at his flank, their faces set in grim anticipation. They advanced with an arrogant confidence, expecting to crush any resistance with sheer numbers. They saw a lone rancher, a single cabin. They saw an easy victory. They saw nothing of the steel in Ben Sterling or the fire in Nehru. The first rifle crack echoed not from the cabin, but from a rocky outcrop Ben had chosen days before. One of Brand's point men pitched from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Ben fired again, his shot finding another mark. Cutter, bellowing curses, drove his men towards the cabin, directly into the trap. As they thundered closer, Nehru rose from the shadows of the barn. An arrow knocked. The bow sang. A rider screamed and fell, the arrow buried deep in his chest. She was a whirlwind of deadly grace, arrow after arrow finding its mark, her face a mask of focused fury. She was not just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her ancestors, for her sacred land, for the quiet man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Ben moved like a ghost, firing, reloading, shifting positions, his old skills a terrifying ballet of destruction. He saw Cutter, dismounted, trying to rally his terrified men. Ben's shot was clean, precise. Cutter fell and did not move again. Brand, his face contorted with rage, charged his horse directly at Ben, who now stood exposed near the water trough. "You will pay for this, rancher," Brand roared, leveling his pistol. But as he fired, Nehru's cry cut through the air. "No!" An arrow hissed past Ben's head, striking Brand's pistol arm. The shot went wide. Ben didn't hesitate. His rifle bucked against his shoulder. Brand stiffened, a look of utter shock on his face, then slowly toppled from his horse, landing in the dust with a sickening thud. The remaining attackers, leaderless and terrified, scattered like quail, fleeing the valley of death. Silence, heavy and profound, descended, broken only by the ragged gasps of Ben and Nehru, and the pounding of their own hearts. He looked at Nehru, her chest heaving, bow still in hand, her eyes blazing. In that moment, she was the most beautiful, formidable woman he had ever seen. He crossed the space between them, his gaze locking with hers. The unspoken hung heavy in the air, a truth more powerful than any words. The aftermath was grim. The sun climbed, casting harsh light on the cost of their survival. Together, Ben and Nehru tended to the fallen, a somber duty performed in near silence. They buried Brand and his men far from the cabin, erasing their stain from the land. Later, Nehru built a small, respectful pyre. Upon it, she placed her grandfather's medicine bundle. As smoke curled towards the vast sky, she sang, her voice clear and strong, a song of mourning, of remembrance, of resilience. Ben stood beside her, not as an outsider, but as a participant in her grief, in her strength. He felt a profound shift within him. The walls around his heart, so carefully maintained for years, crumbling to dust. The immediate danger had passed. The sunken canyon remained inviolate, but everything else had changed. Ben Sterling, the solitary man, was no longer alone. He looked at Nehru, her profile serene now against the backdrop of the setting sun. Her presence had not just disrupted his life, it had reawakened it. He had protected her, yes, but she, in turn, had saved him from a different kind of death, the slow erosion of the soul by loneliness and grief. She turned, her dark eyes meeting his, and this time, her smile was open, radiant, a sunrise after a long night. It held gratitude, respect, and something more, something that mirrored the burgeoning emotion in his own chest. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers closing around hers. It felt right, incredibly right. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with the challenges of a harsh land and the complexities of two different worlds converging. But as they stood together, hand in hand, watching the stars begin to prick the darkening sky above their quiet valley, there was no fear, only a sense of shared destiny, of a hard-won peace, and the quiet, powerful promise of a love story just beginning, a rare and precious bloom in the wild, untamed heart of the West.